Says we're streaming.
You're good to go.
All right. So I will call to order this June 20th meeting of the Board of Education Budget, Finance, and Operations Committee meeting. A little unconventional. Ken Schoberg couldn't be here today, so I'll be chairing. And we've got Rachel Ruggieri and Tina Malhotra on as well. Good evening, all. So why don't we start with our first discussion item, financial report ending May 31st.
Okay, well,
Over
good
to Jill.
evening. Good evening to all. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
We can. Great. So as you said, tonight's report is the budget snapshot of May 31st, 2022. A little similar to last month's report, the district continues to be under budget in its certified and non-certified staff lines, and those are offsetting overages and lines for substitute coverage and special education tuitions. In health benefits, the district is going to have a surplus amount for this year due to the timing of funding of the employee HSA accounts. We have requested that the town set aside these funds to support updates of adaptive playgrounds at several school sites. We will likely discuss this topic at the Town Board of Finance meeting tomorrow night. Other benefits, including non-certified pension contributions, other post-employment benefits or OPEB, life insurance, short and long-term disability are all tracking on budget still. Both FICA and Medicare are also expected to be within budget. In special education, the budget tends to be somewhat volatile as we progress through any given year, but even more so as we approach year end. We have now received both of our excess cost grant installments, and the total falls short of our anticipated $1.4 million, falls short by approximately $229,000. This year, we've also seen increases in tuition costs and services for students with IEPs. These two components cause the area of the budget to trend over as we approach year end. We are awaiting final invoices. They'll be received for the month of June, and hopefully early July, we can start closing purchase orders and report out the amount of deficit in the special education tuition area then. Our transportation costs overall, including our regular bus contract, special education transport, both in and out of town, and athletic transport, collectively is trending on budget. Similar to the special education tuition, like I just discussed, we're going to await final invoicing for the month of June before we can close out those transportation purchase orders. And then we'll be able to find out our final number there. Did you give me a hold on? I thought you said wait, Susie. No? Okay.
I'm on mute.
Okay. Lastly, with regard to energy costs, our electricity contract rate of 0.10690 kilowatts per hour runs through November of this year. We're currently working with our providers to monitor the generation rates for 22-23. And additionally, we were successful in locking in an oil bid at 2.4477 per gallon. The district is going to wait regarding locking in fuel prices for next year in the hopes of some pricing easement between now and October. If we're not able to lock in for the spring, we'll go out to the market in July of 2022. So overall, in summary, projections for fiscal year end show budget overages in special education tuition, in fuel, oil, and in substitute positions, while we're showing revenue shortfalls related to special education in the cost grant, the excess cost grant. And we're also showing shortages in the sporting event revenue. Dane Street had made his numbers for the fall pay to play, but we're a little behind on winter and spring, but it's not a huge number there. Most of our budget overages are going to be offset with the savings that we talked about in our certified and non-certified staff positions. We expect the health insurance budget number, that surplus number, to be in the area of $520,000. And we're going to continue to monitor other budget areas as we process our final invoices for the month of June. We do expect some additional surplus overall, but at this time, I can't give you, I know you want me to, but I can't give you a final figure until we receive our final invoices from June. But we do expect some additional surplus after the health insurance fund. So that is the snapshot report. I'm happy to handle any questions if you have
All
them.
right. Yeah, I know we don't get final invoices until end of July, early August, when we
Yes.
finally, you're able to give us the bottom line, so we won't roast you over that. Any questions from anybody else before I throw mine out? Nope. Okay. So just to put a fine point on it, we're under ECR, our special education reimbursement. We're down by 228,739 due to the budget passed in Hartford. And our energy, I'm a little confused on that one. It says that we locked in. That's locked in for last year, not this year, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We're locked in through November.
Yeah, the way it's worded, it's locked in through November.
Yes.
But we completed it in April, it says. So I guess I'm confused.
Um,
I'm talking about oil, not electricity.
I'm just rereading.
Yeah, I mean, most people are paying $5 plus for home heating oil, and if we were getting 2.45, I'm bringing cans over, but that's just me.
So I think we have to give a consumption rate for mid-April.
Yep.
And then that takes and that is considered at our lock-in rate. But I will talk with Joe just to get a final, because he had forwarded this to me.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds like that's last year's rate. I'm not sure if we're talking right now, we're going to get a rate anywhere near that, but I'm open to being completely wrong. Okay, any other questions on this? All right, let's move on to the transfers.
So for transfers for the month of May, there's nothing unusual to report. There were several transfers requested from departments moving funding to pay some of their final invoices received. For instance, you'll see quite a few in athletic transportation, where one team made it to some post-conference play. So they were, transferring funds back and forth to pay for the transportation to those contests. The largest transfer items were in the curriculum lines. Since teachers didn't attend in-person conferences this year, funds were moved to literacy books and resources to purchase some supplemental materials for professional development in-house. And unless you have questions regarding the May transfers, I do have sort of a different question. I've identified in tech hardware, there was some spending this year that occurred, and in your budget for fiscal year 23, there's a request for district-wide hardware, but the line that it's in, that second series of numbers, right? The 100 means it's general fund. 1200, that second set of numbers, identifies that as special education, but that's not special education spending. That's district-wide hardware. Wes has a different line for assistive technology, and we don't want any purchases in that line to be tagged as special education, because we would be overstating what the district spends on special education when we report to the state. So I would like to take that entire $950,000 line, which is in next year's budget, and move it to a general district-wide hardware line that is not tagged as special education.
That's kind of a big oops. How did that happen?
I'm not sure. That happened during the budget development, and I also thought it was a big oops, and that could really tangle up maintenance of effort for the district. So I looked into this year, and there were expenditures. I want to say it's 391,000 year to date out of that line. So we'll do a journal entry to move that for this year. And then I went back in years past, and there was no spending at all, $0 from that line. So I was also confused. I couldn't say how it got there, but I know that it shouldn't be there. So with your permission, we will make that change to the fiscal 23 budget. And I suppose you have to bring that to the full board for vote next week, correct?
I believe so. And we should have a good explanation. If we have any background on how it happened, that would be great. But I'm glad you're here to help solve the problem.
I asked, so Wes is the department chair, and he wouldn't know. He said, oh, that's my hardware line. That's where everything comes out of. So I'll see if I can dig some more for you, but We just
So
don't
just
know
to,
how.
just to be clear though, so for Jill, for years past,
Mhm.
it was always, there was nothing in that line. So it wasn't taken out of that 1200 code was not, I mean, for most of us, we would not know. We would not know that 1200 means anything. So it could have just been an error this year and next year. So for next year, it's easy because we can, not easy, but it sounds easy to me. It seems like we can just make that adjustment for that $900,000+ that's outlined in our budget book with that code 100. Instead, it says 1200, it would go to a different code, correct, Jill?
Yeah.
So
Correct.
that's an easier adjustment. For this current year, though, it's in the same place, right?
It's in the same place. And so what we would do is do one journal entry to move the entire sum. And we would leave notes for the auditor as to why we did that. Because the purchasing that was done, for instance, some of the equipment that he's purchased out of that line was for a computer lab in the art room at the high school. That's what brought it to my attention, because I was releasing that requisition. And I said, well, wait a second, that's art at the high school. This is a uniform chart of accounts used by all school systems. And there's such scrutiny on special education everywhere. We all know that that 1200 identifies it as a special education item. So then that got me digging, and we discovered this year's expenditures that need to be moved over, which we can do with just one entry in totality. And then I looked into next year's budget, and in that line is $950,000. So you definitely don't want that tied to special education.
Agreed, because it would distort everything. Is it just these 2 years we're concerned with? Have we done a look back a couple more years and see if this has been going on for a long time and we're correcting it, or?
It's just these 2 years. I don't
Okay.
see any spending prior to this current fiscal year.
Okay, again, I'm glad you're here to help solve this problem and be transparent
too.
about it. So,
Great.
any question about the other transfers before I lob my questions? So the big one that stands out to me is on the second page, RHS Music. Well, first to second page, looks like we have about 10 grand worth of stolen equipment. What happened?
That's
Dr. DeSilva, do you want to talk about the theft that occurred there before my arrival?
sure. So we are working with the police department, Sean, but there were items that were removed from our school. I don't want to impede an investigation, so I won't get into all of the details, but there were items that were removed specifically from our music classroom. And this is to repurchase the items that were taken. And again, it is an active investigation in which we are working with the police department on that matter.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking 10 grand. That's not insignificant. That's
No.
big. Yeah, and I microfilming. What is microfilming?
Which line are you on? Sean?
Under the RHS Music transfers, we had $390 for microfilming. Are we talking about microfiche still? Because I'm old, and that's what I would think that is.
I'm the same age as you. Maybe
I think I'm older than you.
I also know what microfiche is, so it must have been. Give me 1 second. I'm just looking to see where it says microfiche. I'm under the music.
Well, it says microfilming, and I don't. I'm interpreting that because
I think that's probably microfiche. It's probably microfiche.
So I found it, Dr. DeSilva, the second to the last page.
Yeah, I found it too. Yeah.
There's a line in the budget still for that, and they're transferring out of that in order to replace funds to go to.
Am I the only one that thinks if we're spending money on microfiche, we have a problem?
So
Oh, it wasn't spent.
yeah. But I
Get
do.
it, but why is it in the budget?
I'm not 100% sure that that's microfiche. I'll find out.
We're not talking about a huge amount of money. It's $390, but it just struck me as a little bit weird.
But it may have something to do with, before I jump ahead, I'll find out what that is. It may have something to do with transcripts, but I will find out.
And any other questions before I do my last one? So the only other one I have is there's some, I guess the Huddle program has cost us less than expected because of discounts and whatever. That program, when we put that in place, we were talking about using that for non-sports things, like for the music department, whatever became of that. Is this now really a sports captive thing and we were hoodwinked, or?
I don't know that, I don't think that I know that you're not limited only to using Huddle for sports events. So I'm not sure at this point if there was a need for using Huddle for, let's just say the same thing with a music event, watching it, saying to kids, let's take a look at what you did really well and perhaps some opportunities for growth.
I guarantee that there's some music kids that would love to have a portfolio for their college applications, just like the sports kids do.
So I don't think, Sean, I'm sure there are, and there's nothing preventing us from using it in that way other than perhaps growing the capacity of the adults that would, facilitate it. That's all. But I can find out more about that. I think that's a good question for a board meeting as well that we can bring up.
Okay. That's all I've got on transfers. And we have one last agenda item on transportation funding.
So I actually have two items underneath this one bulleted item. The first, you have a memo from me that we shared as part of the packet, which has to do with the purchase of 2 vans earlier this year. They had purchased the vans in the general fund out of Joe's budget. And the idea at the time was to make a revision to the ESSER 2 grant and do an expenditure adjustment, put them over to the grant. Because the budget can allow for the purchase of those 2 vans, what I am recommending is that you leave the grant revision in place, leave the current van purchase in the general fund, and then you have next year in your ESSER grant, you already have the capability to purchase 1 or 2 additional vans, because what's happening now is working and it's saving you money and it gives you a little bit more flexibility. So that's what I would recommend.
D, any color commentary on that?
So you may remember when we decided to move forward with the pilot on the 2 vans, at that time, obviously we didn't budget for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we also knew that if this was going to go into effect for fiscal year 23, because of the supply shortages, we would need to order those vans early on. So I want to say that we probably ordered those somewhere between like November and early December, because obviously the positive impact of that is for fiscal year 23's budget. So we would have ordered them on or around that time. By the way, we still don't have them. So it was a smart move on our part to order them in October, November, December, because we still don't have them right now. The anticipated receiving of those, I want to say, is the end of July. And so we originally, obviously we had to create a purchase order. So we had to pay for them out of the operating budget until we could have revised the ESSER 3 grant, of which I ultimately did do, and ultimately it was approved. So now that the money is there and allocated and available for those vans, we have 2 choices. So we have the choice to take it out of the operating budget, about $90,000, I believe, and transfer it into the ESSER 3 grant, or we leave it exactly where it is right now, since we have the money within the operating budget to pay for them, and then leave that shift in the ESSER 3 grant to allow us to purchase an additional 2 vans should the pilot be as successful as we're hoping it to be, based on the plan that we've created, so long as we can find drivers. So anyone out there? So if we can find drivers, so in the plan in which it's modeled right now should be able to save us what we put into the operating budget for the savings, what we put in the operating budget for fiscal year 23. Obviously, there's only 2 vans and they only carry so many kids and can only go so many distances within the day to allow for that savings. So the hope is, if we find the success that we're anticipating, that we have the money in ESSER 3 to purchase another 2 right at the start of the school year, once we get rolling and see that the savings actually, memorializes.
Okay.
Is that making sense?
It actually does make sense. Does anybody have any questions about that? Personally, if it's, we find that it saves money, I'm all for expanding the program. I think that's an appropriate use.
So my apologies for being tardy to today's meeting. It's 100% my fault.
That's okay. Welcome.
Hi. I just want to say I'm totally in support of anytime we can buy our own vehicles. I know it is difficult to find employees to drive them, but in looking at comparative districts, when we are able to purchase our own vehicles, it really does have an ROI. So I am supportive of leaving this in. We've already covered the cost for the first two, so it makes perfect sense. And Jill, I think, and Susie, I think your recommendation is spot on to continue to try to purchase vehicles where we can, especially with the insanely rising cost of special ed transportation and, unique transportation needs. So I just wanted to say I'm supportive of this recommendation. Again, apologies for being.
Okay, and that presumes we can find some drivers, and I hope we certainly can.
Yeah, I mean, we should be able to find them, and we'll be creative in doing that. But as it stands right now, again, if it memorializes with what we're anticipating, we should be able to. We went a little bit further than probably comfortable in fiscal year 23 with the savings that we thought we'd get with the 2 vans, but it does look like that should work itself out. So if that's the case, we know that we have the money in the S3 grant. And ultimately, if we find that it perhaps doesn't work, we still have the money there that we just need to readjust the narrative and then transfer it into a different way. So either way, I think it'll be okay.
No, I think it's good. We're holding some of that back to see what happens and make some informed choices.
Sean, if it's okay with you, if I can go back to the earlier part of the agenda, Joe
Sure.
Listened in, that 2.477 was up until early April. He needed to go back out for $20,000 to finish the year, and that's at $3 a gallon,
All right,
a gallon.
I'll tell the wife to leave the cans in the garage then.
That's right.
Okay.
Although 3 seems like a pretty good deal too.
Still pretty good comparatively, yes.
Thank you, Joe.
That makes sense.
And to answer that question about microfilming,
Mhm.
it looks like they're listening in, and that is, I believe it is microfiche, not filming, because we don't know what microfilming is. So there's.
That opens up a whole other question, but.
Well, it does. And I want to go back to my memory, but I think if I remember correctly, we had to have money in the budget for microfiche to do some transfer if someone needed a records request. And you might remember that from 2 years ago. So I think the question around microfiche came up then too. So some of our old records are still on microfiche. And so we needed to maintain some money in the budget in the event that we needed to transfer that microfiche to something that someone can actually read or print. So that's perhaps why it's still there. But
Okay.
I'll find out for sure. But
yeah, again, we're not talking about a lot of money. This isn't changing the parameters of our budget in any measurable way. It just struck me as a little bit odd.
Mhm.
So I think that's the last item on our agenda. Does anybody?
Well,
have
there's a second bullet under transportation.
Oh, there is. Let me take a
Yeah,
look.
we didn't have a
Oh,
memo or
I don't
anything
see it.
to forward
Okay.
you, but we did want to talk about and just start a discussion.
Sure.
So it has to do with transportation for magnet schools.
Mhm.
And what is required in the state of Connecticut by statute is that the district must pay the tuition for the magnet school. That's the student's choice, but we are not on the hook for transportation outside of the Ridgefield area.
Right.
And we do have students that are attending the Regional Center for the Arts, or RCA. And what's happening now is we are applying each year for a grant from the state of Connecticut to transport these students. And because we have enough students to almost meet what it costs to transport them, which is roughly $13,000 to $14,000 a year. And I say roughly because that gives us a certain amount of hours each day. If we have snow, if we hit traffic and the drivers go over their allotted hours, we have overage charges. So there is some fluctuation there, but it's not a hugely significant amount. And what we're receiving in grants is just under 12,000. So there's some exposure here, but my concern is we can't arbitrarily choose what the district's going to do beyond what's required, right? Because that's kind of a can of worms in my view. But we have students that have been attending and have made plans and chosen to attend based on historically, perhaps erroneously, but historically, we've provided transportation. So you don't want to pull the rug out from these students, right? So we had this year currently 2 ninth graders, 2 10th graders that were using transportation. Possibly more students are attending that school, but we have 4 using the transportation. So I wanted to start the conversation to see what you thought about perhaps sunsetting this when these current students have come through. So if we had 2 ninth graders, we would need the transportation for 3 more years, meaning it would sunset in June of 25, or perhaps for 2 more years, because they may likely drive themselves, and maybe that's enough notice to give a parent. So I just thought I would start the discussion, see what your thoughts were on that. If we have 1 student that attends, it's going to cost us the same. If we have more students that attend and it costs us another vehicle, it's going to cost the district more. There'll be some exposure there. And I just had a thought about providing something beyond what the state requires for any area. So those are my thoughts. Dr. De Silva, I don't know if I left anything out and you want to chime in also.
Thanks, Jill. So there's a couple of things. So right now we don't have the significant exposure because we have a bus available. So what we're paying for are the extended hours on that transportation vehicle, which is where you get that number. We're offsetting it with the grant money, but that grant money is allocated per student. So again, if you have more students, so long as they fit on the bus, then we have less exposure. If we have less students, then we would have more exposure because we wouldn't have that grant money to offset the costs. Naturally, and Jill, I think, was politically correct when she said, perhaps erroneously. So according to our board policy, we would not pay for the magnet school because it's not in the area. So thus, we're in a bit of a position because when we discovered, we have a new transportation director, when we discovered the error, naturally, children are already attending the school. So they already know that this is what they were expecting, right? So they're there as 9th graders currently, then they'll be sophomores. For the 8th graders, they've made that decision just around now. So they would perhaps benefit if we used the recommendation that Jill gave. They would benefit for those 3 years, let's say at the most, right? Because that's what we would say. But to be fair, they're giving proper notice. They decided to go there. We learned that they decided to go there. We're letting them know that yes, they can go, but ultimately transportation wouldn't be paid for. But there's a bit of a difference for those students that are already there and have already come to expect that transportation was covered. So that is the challenge that we're facing right now. It is not a huge cost right now, given what we would be receiving in grant money. I think it would be under $5,000. And so we have 3 options. We let parents know now, as we began to let them know that is no longer going to be covered. We have option 2 that covers all students for 3 years and 3 years only, because that means that the existing student, the current 9th grader, would finish out their experience there and we would cover. And the third option is that we only cover, we cover for amount of notice, so 2 years. So that would get them to their senior year when they would then, probably drive on their own or have the ability to drive. So those are the 3 options. And they're just really, it was hard for Jill to capture this in a memo because it probably wouldn't make sense. So we wanted to just bring it up as a discussion point and likely to come back to the board. We know this information now, so we feel like it's important that families and the community knows, while at the same time, we also understand the challenge that some families may be facing when their child is already there and a member of that community in their half-day program. And now we would be perhaps not being able to offer the transportation piece.
Any questions from other board members before I lob mine?
Yeah, I don't have questions, Sean, but I do have concerns. Ultimately, we are not following our own policy, which we expect others to follow. And to me, that is a seriously concerning lack of, just consistency. So I think 2 years is more than generous to say, hey, we made a mistake and we weren't following our policy. I actually think that's too long for our taxpayers to pay something that's not part of our RPS policy that our taxpayers are covering every, and as transportation continues to become one of our largest increases every single day in our costs. This isn't just, over the next 2-3 years, who knows what's going to happen. And it's already a huge burden on our taxpayers to cover free and appropriate education, which is within policy. So while I'm willing to compromise personally, I think, hey, we have to own the fact that we made a mistake and allowed our own policy not to be followed. I think anything beyond that has now become an opportunity to question the efficacy of our actual policies, and that is highly concerning to me. And so I think this is an issue that needs to come before the whole board. I'd like to understand what the total impact of this has been since the time we didn't follow our policy to now, so we understand and can share with the community what this mistake has actually cost us. I understand that these students come first and that we need to respect the fact that their parents have made this choice, but at the same time, we don't provide transportation to other private schools outside of Ridgefield. We do provide it for St. Mary's and some other private schools, but we certainly don't provide it outside of that. So the magnets are now different and inequitable. And so this opens us up to a whole slew of questions about, well, how far is too far? And what are we doing? Because we don't provide every single Ridgefield student who goes to a school outside of Ridgefield transportation. And so while I'm certainly willing to compromise, I do think that anything beyond 2 years is excessive and certainly exceeds any notification process that would happen with anything else. So I'll just state that I'm disappointed that this came about, but I'm not surprised, sadly. Our transportation in Ridgefield has been a challenge since I joined the board, for sure, and one that I've been very concerned about our overall costs and the lack of management and oversight there. So I'm really glad, Jill, that you're finding that and the new transportation director is finding that. And I'm glad that we've uncovered this. But I can't justify telling our taxpayers we now are going to violate policy for 3 full years. That just seems excessive to me. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Liz.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering how we got here. How did this start? What's the genesis of it? And why are we covering it for this school, but not Abbott Tech or any of the others? It does seem a little bit strange to me that we've been paying for this for I don't know how many years, and all of a sudden it comes up as a problem.
Well, so the charters are the state, and Jill can speak to this better than I can, but the state statute is slightly different for each different type of school. And so for example, our Ridgefield, in this particular case for the magnet school, the policy says out of the area. So that could have been why it was interpreted one particular way, but the inquiry actually came originally from me with the coordinator of the magnet schools in terms of the cost of transportation. And then thankfully we have Billy that did a little bit of more digging, and then Jill who did even more so. So I think that's part of the reason it's being uncovered now is the policy itself. When it talks about magnet schools, it talks about area, but perhaps that's how they were defining that in the past. So that certainly could be one of the reasons. But each, so charter schools are one way, magnet schools are another. So they're all slightly different in terms of, what our requirements are in terms of providing transportation. But the reality is we know now, as Liz said, and so giving parents proper notice, I think, is appropriate. And we have struggled with what's proper notice. Is a month proper notice? Is 2 weeks proper notice? Is a year proper notice? When they've come to expect this, but to Liz's point, giving them notice, perhaps a year is good enough. But we wanted to bring it up to, obviously for discussion.
Yeah, I think, the full board should probably hear it and discuss it and figure out the best way forward. But we've done a lot already, and doing many, many years more of this is, I think, onerous on the taxpayers, like Liz said. But I'm just one person. So it's good we know about it. It's good we get to talk about it. I think we need to. So any other questions on this or any other
Have
items?
we notified all of the parents affected by this, that this is a violation of policy and an exception that we are doing until we have a full board vote? Or what's been the and any future, obviously we don't want to continue to exacerbate this. So I would assume any future students, even if they have room on the bus, are being notified of the cost that it will take, so that they don't think that it is part of the taxpayer burden for their student under the policy.
Do you want to speak to that,
Want me
Jill?
to take that? Yes, we've sent 2 letters out. The first letter was just notifying them that we wanted to cease transportation for next year. And
Okay.
as you can imagine, young students who started a program there, who've made relationships and friends and teachers and are looking forward to curriculum next year, that was tough, because I think there are some situations where if they don't have transportation, they're not going to be able to attend. It was hard. After receiving the feedback, of course, our team is going and looking for solutions all around.
Yeah.
So that's what started the discussion of, do we ease it in? Do we sunset it over time? It's even complicated by the fact that there are 2 times during the year where we have to give the state proof of registration, how many students are registered at the school. We don't get our final, we just got the grant for this year last month, based on the registration from this year. So we can't say to the parents, we're going to guarantee that we get this grant. We have no reason to think that we're not going to get the grant, because we've gotten it in years prior, but it's not something that we can say, yes, we're going to get X amount of dollars in the grant, and it's the remaining cost is going to be Y, and then we'll split up that money we can't even give them a number. So the more we dug, the more complicated it got. And, I don't want to give any opinion. I don't really have opinion on it, but I do know it was hard to take those phone calls and listen to the students that were looking forward to their programming next year. So for next year, that was tough for me. And I'm usually pretty tough on these
Yeah,
things.
no, sure. I mean, I totally respect that, Jill. I think we do need to notify, though, what the cost would be without the grant, and say, going forward, here is the worst case scenario that we anticipate, and here's what the variable scenario is for based on fuel charges or whatever. I don't know, but give them some range or some estimate of what it will cost to send their child to that school without the grant. And then obviously our goal will be to continue to exceed and provide that grant to them, so that that's not out of pocket, but they need to start preparing for it now. And I think, a year and a half or whatever it is before that fee is due is an adequate time to provide somebody to say, this is what the potential burden would be on your personal finances versus the town's taxpayers' finances against policy. And I do want to call that out, because it's not like this is free. This is, our community is paying for this against policy. So, and that's fine. We did what we did, but I do think we need to start making it very clear to those 14 or 13 students, families, what it will take should we not receive that grant. And any future families should not, they should get that information up front, that we cannot guarantee transportation, and this is what your cost will estimated cost, just like you get a letter of potential benefits from your insurer, right? We can't guarantee that we will get this grant. And so if you choose to send your kid to this school, here is what you could potentially be out of pocket. I think that's just fair. And then obviously the full board has to vote on the time frame, but I do think 2 years is more than adequate. In fact, I think it's generous for this, and it is what it is. And I'm sorry that you had to deal with it, Jill, as a new person coming in and finding this stuff, but I'm glad we have a new director of transportation and you looking into this stuff finally. Thank you.
So I'll follow up and get you all of those figures and particulars going into the next board meeting. Hopefully Cheryl will have it to send out with your packet.
What also probably would be helpful, Jill, for the full board is understanding the difference between the vocational and the magnet.
Sure.
Because there are different, and what's tricky about the magnet school, just to add to it for a parent that might be transporting their child, it's not the full day. So it's part of a child's day. So you'd have to, what makes it even more challenging at this point in time, when we're notifying families, is they would literally have to leave their job if they had one middle of the day and then, for a couple of hours, and then come back, which again, we're all, whatever decision you make as a family, that's fine. But in terms of the notice to families is what complicated it at this point. And so we will, between now and Monday's board meeting, we will come to the board with a recommendation based on what we're hearing here, and see if the board agrees.
Thank you.
Sure. Sean, I think you're muted.
Are we missing anything else from the agenda, or are we complete? I think we're complete.
We are complete on the microfiche as well. So that statement was accurate. Good thing people are listening in, because they're, yes.
That's awesome. I'm glad that your team is listening in. It makes things so much more better.
It does make it better. So yes, it's microfiche, and it's the cost that we're required to maintain those old records.
I get it. Those machines must be really, really old by now.
It is.
I think I want to go visit Wes and see one. It's been a while.
Yes. Me too, actually. Tina and Sean, you may notice an invitation in your inbox if you're available to attend a policy meeting, just about 10 minutes. If you are, great. If not, we will try to problem solve that one.
Are we having a quorum challenge for that one?
We are.
Okay, I can probably figure that one out.
I can do that. Could I get the packet with Susie so that I can read? Because
Sure.
it's tough to follow along if I don't have any information.
Of course, Tina, I will make sure as soon as we hang up here that I'll give them a call. I
Thank you.
How many folks do you need for that one?
think we also need 2 more, right?
2 more?
Okay.
Okay. So with that, why don't we adjourn this one and figure out